By the time most people reach adulthood, they often believe that their emotional patterns are simply who they are. I am just anxious. I am just emotionally guarded. I am just bad at relationships. I have always been this way. But many patterns that feel personal were first learned through conditioning. In the last episodes, we explored emotional survival, adaptation, triggers, self abandonment, and emotional safety. And eventually, these experiences begin shaping the structure of identity itself. Because childhood conditioning does not only influence behavior, it influences perception, emotion, relationship, self worth, and the way the emotional self learns to exist in the world. A child repeatedly exposed to criticism may grow into an adult who constantly anticipates judgment. A child who only received attention through achievement may begin connecting worth with performance. A child who experienced emotional unpredictability may become hyper aware of everyone else's emotional state. And after enough repetition, these responses stop feeling learned, they begin feeling natural. This is how conditioning works. Not loudly, but gradually, quietly, repeatedly. And perhaps one of the most difficult realizations is understanding how much of identity was shaped through emotional adaptation. The fear of disappointing others, the need to stay emotionally acceptable, the discomfort with vulnerability, the instinct to over explain, the inability to rest. These patterns often begin as conditioned survival responses, and conditioning becomes especially powerful when the emotional self learns that love, safety, or belonging depend on becoming someone specific. Be easier, be impressive, be emotionally contained, be useful, be low maintenance, and eventually the emotional self begins organizing identity around what feels safest to be. This is why healing is not only emotional, it is also relational and identity level. Because healing often requires questioning patterns that once felt permanent, patterns that once felt like personality but may actually be conditioning repeated long enough to feel true. And this can feel deeply uncomfortable because when conditioning begins dissolving, the emotional self often asks, if I am not these survival patterns, then who am I? And perhaps that uncertainty is not failure, it is transition. Because healing is not replacing identity, it is separating authenticity from conditioning. The fears, the roles, the emotional reflexes, the protective identities that were learned in order to survive. And slowly, the emotional self begins discovering what exists beneath adaptation. Because perhaps the deepest form of healing is not becoming a different person. It is finally realizing how much of yourself was built around survival and gently allowing what is authentic to return. And maybe the real beginning of freedom is no longer confusing conditioning with who you truly are. In the next phase of this series, we will begin exploring the survival identities the emotional self learns to perform, starting with people pleasing and why survival sometimes teaches people to abandon themselves in order to remain loved.